In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. Moya, oh light, oh Moya, oh bright. Welcome back again, guys. Thank you so much for all your support. We see you. The views are going up. The numbers are going up. It's just so nice. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. You're not that good at it though, but I will thank you for it. Thank you very, very much. The channel is growing. As you know, we are here to unpack our African history. We're here to rewire our DNA because the schools that we go to do not teach us the information that we need to self-actualize as Africans. And I found another academic and teacher for you guys. We're going to go through the history of South Africa, the land, the wars, all the stuff that... Remember when white people used to be like, yeah, and then the black people were defeated and then the language would change when it's them. When it's white people, they retreated. Anyways, I've got a professor with us today, Dr JJ KLAAS. And you just got an award, Ganene.
Yeah.
Yes. So we've got an award-winning guest today.
Yeah.
I think the Eastern Cape gave you an award for your contribution to culture.
Definitely. Yeah, and promotion of culture and heritage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Appreciate it.
So why do you do the work you do then?
It goes back 30 years when I was a student at the University of Fort Hare. I was angry about the way in which history was taught at the time because they put more emphasis on memorization and regurgitation. It's unlike other subjects I did at the time, like English, that was taught by Professor Mzamane, where he encouraged us to think, to be critical, to ask questions, and he would talk about liberation of the African mind. Now, you go to history, it's dull. It's good content at times, but you can't ask a question. So there's an incident I even talked about in my book. We are sitting here in a class, and the lecturer is talking about the good role played by missionaries in Southern Africa. So I then lifted up my head and says, "Sir, I hear you, but what about the assertion made by Bishop Siqebo Dwane?" And then I quoted one saying, "The post-missionary Christianity in Africa, with its links with colonialism, capitalism, and the abstract proclamation of the gospel has created a deep cultural confusion and left a permanent scar on the souls of the African people," unquote. So then the lecturer was a white Afrikaner. He removed his glasses, walked around. It was dead quiet in the classroom. And then he asked me a question, says, "Is that a question or a comment?" And I had to read between the lines that if I say it's a question, I may lose the course because it's tantamount to a challenge. If I say it's a comment, probably he will proceed to the lectures if nothing has happened. And my reading was right. So I said, "No, sir, it's a comment." And he proceeded. To cut the long story short, I passed history because I majored in English, history, and education. But the subject I really wanted to proceed was history. After that, I gave up on it. So my master's, I did education, PhD, sociology. Now, about 30 years later, I decided to revisit the subject. Yeah. So that's why I decided to write that book, Triangle of 100 Years Wars, and which turned out actually in the context of the Eastern Cape. The first African to write history of the Eastern Cape was Henderson Soga in 1930. In 93 years, no one has written a history of the Eastern Cape from the African perspective. The only people who contributed was Professor Perez in 1976. In the 1990s, then it was Professor Tim Stapleton and Noor Mostert.
By three.
But the first one was
Okay.
the African
Okay.
in 1930. So my book is the second book to be written by an African in 93 years. And my book is the first book which is written with a very strong assertions, which says that Nongqawuse was a colonial construct.
What?
Yes.
Are you saying?
Yeah, I said that in my book. I made that discovery to say the whole story that we learned all these years, to say abantu abamnyama African killed their cattle. It's not true. And I
What
made
is
that
the
discovery.
story?
Remember when we grew up from this book, before I wrote the book, all we knew was Xhosa became victims of their own creation. That was a colonial construct. They killed their own cattle. They went into starvation. Population was reduced. Then they were saved by the white colonialist.
Yes, that is because
Yeah.
they were non-believers and believers.
Yeah. So what and what said about Nongqawuse is that the people who came after that, the products of missionary schools, even went further. Now I'm talking about.
You've jumped, doctor.
Yeah. Now I'm talking about people who are.
But we still don't know the Nongqawuse story.
I'm coming to that.
Oh, okay.
So the people who wrote about Nongqawuse are saying, I'm talking about now the African reverend. Nongqawuse actually, it's a good thing it happened that they killed their cattle because it was a form of spiritual redemption. So what I discovered, I went back to research. Remember, history has got two layers. My book in history is regarded as a secondary source because I wrote based on other sources.
Yes.
But if you want to be a true historian, you should go beyond the secondary sources to look at primary sources. So what I did in my case, then I went to read eyewitness accounts of people who were there at that time. That's what I did, looking at primary sources, looking at people who wrote about that period, 1856 and 1857. So what I discovered was that actually, when Sir George Grey landed here in December 1854, few months after his arrival, there was a mysterious cat lung sickness which started killing the cattle of Xhosa. And the funny thing is that it targeted only Xhosa. It didn't affect Abatembu, it didn't affect Amampondo, it didn't affect Amampondomise. This lung sickness targeted the people who were fighting this 100 years wars. So the disease started spreading around 1855. Then at the beginning of 1856, Xhosa discovered the pattern of the disease, that it had two characteristics. One, it was highly contagious. Two, it was very lethal. So they started killing the infected cattle in 1856 and 1857. But unfortunately, it was rather too late. That disease decimated about 90% of the cattle of Xhosa.
Oh, my God.
Which therefore makes me to conclude that actually Eastern Cape was never conquered in the battlefield. It was through the introduction of the British biological weapon of cattle destruction. That's how conquest was attained.
What do you mean? You have to explain that to us.
What I'm trying to mean is that in history, they are saying when the British came here, they fought with us, they defeated us, they took the country. It may have happened in other parts of the world or other parts of the continent, but not in the Eastern Cape. In the Eastern Cape, when Nongqawuse came in 1854, it was after the British were defeated by Xhosa in 3 consecutive wars. The first defeat was in 1835, after the British killed King Hintsa. Maqoma avenged that defeat. Then he challenged the British to the mountains of Amatola to say, "You kill our king? Come on, bring it on." So the British army was led by the Peninsular War veteran, Major General Harry Smith, hailed as the hero of Alwal. So he was accompanied by the governor of the Cape Colony at that time, Sir Benjamin Durban. So they crossed the Kai River to meet Maqoma in the mountains of Matol. That encounter was disastrous for the British Army. The British Army was defeated for the first time in Africa by Maqoma in 1835. The defeat was so humiliating that Major General Harry Smith was fired, was sent to India to redeem his military career. Sir Benjamin Durban exiled himself in Canada. The white Boers who were in that part of the colony since 1652. For the first time after 1835, they embarked on the Great Trek and crossed the Orange River and established what they used to call Transvaal and Orange Free State after the defeat by Amaxhosa in 1835. Then the British tried again in 1846 to send the Knight of Hanover, Major General John Hare. He was the distinguished Napoleonic War veteran. He had 4 divisions. It was the British mounted soldiers, the Boer infantry, the Khoisan snipers, and the Mamfeng auxiliaries. Then he marched into Kaiskamauk. Remember, Kaiskamauk was the heartland of the resistance of Amaxhosa. That's where they waged the wars, because the place is mountainous. So they went there for the second time, now led by Major General John Hare. King Sandile was waiting. He retaliated. Historians are saying the power and the precision of that overwhelming attack Sandile launched dismantled the core of the British Army. General John Hare was not fired. He resigned, collapsed, and later lost his life from heart attack. The third defeat of the British was the War of Mlanje in 1850. It started on the 24th of December 1850, when Lieutenant Colonel George Mackinnon faced a crushing defeat on what we call today Sandile Dam in Kaiskamauk, defeated by Sandile. And that war went on for 2.5 years in Mount Misery. So Sir George Grey, when he came in 1854, he was the first governor to be an educated man, to be a civilian. All along, the British, since 1805, brought military governors. But after the third defeat, they brought a civilian governor. It tells you that there was a change of policy.
Yeah.
Then the civilian governor then was accompanied by this surreptitious, mysterious cattle lung sickness.
What?
So that's what then my book says.
What a big lie.
It is.
That has lasted centuries and centuries.
Yes, a resistant one.
Even Tatu Zeksim has got a book called The Heart of Redness based on that, saying the old, the fake story, basically.
Yes. People believed it. Because if you look at my argument, it's logical. There was no way Amaxhosa would have killed their cattle. Do you know that in the olden days, Umxhosa would have 500 cattle? He knows them by names. When he goes to the forest, he doesn't push them behind. He walks, they follow him. When he goes back in the sunset at 6 o'clock, he stands on a mountain. He calls them by names, and they follow him back home. Amaxhosa were cows were more than pets to them. Remember, to Amaxhosa, the cattle were the representation of the past, the present, and the future. Yes, to Amaxhosa. Because they believe that as Mnandi Ngujongi, I inherited these cattle from my father, who got them from the great-grandfather. So these cattle have been here for centuries. We come and live, these cattle are here. That's why Amaxhosa, to show that how important cattle were, when Makoma went to circumcision school, guess what happened? They gave him an ox called Jingle. On that ox, he established his nation called Amajinga. That's how important cattle were. Amambalu were named after Mbalu, the name of an ox. If you hear Amakwati, when you talk about Amakwati, bethetha ngesithakazelo bathi inkomo zikaJojo, zikaXesibe, zikaMchuchumbe. Zinkomo ezo. Because they built nations using the names of the... And inkomo were not slaughtered for food by Amaxhosa. If they need meat, they go and hunt meat. So you tell me that people came and killed their cattle because of a girl called Nongqawuse. These cows to them meant, as I said, that they represented the past, the present, and the future. To Amaxhosa, I will own these cows. When I die, I give them over to my son to take over. The generations come and go, these cows are part of the family. That is why Amaxhosa, if they go and pay lobola, that lobola was not what we call a payment, Amaxhosa. It was a symbolic gesture of uniting the families, because we are giving you part of what is ours, that is so dear to us.
Oh my God.
So now you say that these people killed their cattle. So you need to understand the deep cultural value and the strong, inextricable relationship Amaxhosa had with their cattle, then you begin to understand that this thing was not true.
Oh, this is so shocking.
Yes.
So, you touched on him a little bit, but we only hear about kings a little bit. We'll hear about King Moshweshwe, King Hintsa. We don't. So please tell us about King Hintsa.
King Hintsa was an enigma. If you talk about King Hintsa, you talk about a king who would never maintain his eye contact with the subject. Because if he does that, that will mean that he's lowering himself to your level. That was King Hintsa would just look at you once and then look down because he was a king. And King Hintsa was exceptionally brilliant. If the visitors, remember they used to have those houses where it's like a rendezvous like this. So people would come and be entertained here today. They will say to them, the king is not here. He will come tomorrow. Yet King Hintsa is sitting on one of those rendezvous, watching the movement of these people, checking the body language. So by the time he engages you following day, he knows all of you. He has studied you. That was King Hintsa. And when they brought to him the issue of the twins, where they were saying one, his fingers was cut,
You're going to have to give us that story as well. Please act as if we're stupid.
Yes.
Give us.
So Onyana Bakavuyisile came to the king to say, one, when he was born, the hand was out, they cut the finger, then it went inside again. A second boy came with no finger cut. So now the claim was, who's the oldest? Is the one who showed his hand, they cut the finger and then came later on? Or is the one who came out the whole body first? So King Hintsa, because he was a man of wisdom, he didn't rush to make judgment on this. He called the nation and says, deliberate on this. They deliberated on that matter for 3 months. When they came now into a conclusion, then the king came here to affirm what the nation has observed. That's how Amaxhosa looked at issues of justice. So King Hintsa, when you look at him, the man was so... Look at how he died. For me, he died with courage, honor, and integrity. When the British crossed the Krai River for the first time to invade his kingdom, remember at that time, probably half of his people were helping Maqoma around Kaiskamaoko. Secondly, at that time, his people were not as battle-hardened as the other side of the Krai River, where people were fighting the colonialists on a daily basis. So King Hintsa sat down and says, the most important thing here is my people and my cows. You remember I was talking about the cows? He owned over 100,000 cows, his nation. He told his nation that, look, I'm going to play a delaying tactic. I'll march to the jaws of the crocodile. I'll sit in the British camp. I know they will take me as a prisoner. They may kill me later on, but it's fine. But it's important the nation must survive. Do you know why King Hintsa did that? In the olden days, if you want to destroy a nation, kill the king. Once you kill the king, the nation disappears. For example, when Amahlubi, one of the biggest nations at the time,
Yes.
when their royal leader, Umpangazita, was killed by Matiwana around Lesotho, Amahlubi disintegrated. When Matiwane of Amangwane was defeated in the Battle of Mbolombo near Mthatha in 1828, Amangwane disintegrated. So the British knew the pattern. So when they crossed the Krai River, planning to kill King Hintsa, the plan was to disintegrate what was then called the nation of Amaxhosa.
Strike the shepherd.
Yes, but they miscalculated. So what King Hintsa did, he stayed there in the British camp for 2 weeks. His people were moving from Tata towards Lusikisiki with 100,000 cows. And he kept on getting messages in terms of how far they were. Once his people were far away from the reach of the British army, then he says, okay, it's fine. Then he communicated with Maqoma, probably to say, if I die, avenge my death. So when Captain saw the shot King Hintsa on the waters of Ngabaga, the British got a message saying Maqoma is inviting you to the mountains of Matole. So that is King Hintsa for you.
How did they kill him? When you say on the river, you talk to us as if we're clever like
No,
you.
they chased him to the river, and he was wounded. He was chased by Major General Harry Smith, accompanied by Captain Southey and other officers. So he rushed to the river. He only showed his head in the river trying to hide. So the British soldiers came, the officers. So the oral source of one of the Khoisan men who was there reported that King lifted up his hand, submerged from water.
Yes.
And then it says, Dahwameva. It means peace. And then Captain Southey, on instructions of Major General Harry Smith, shot him at close range. The bullet cut half of his head. And then the what do you call it? The brain was all over. Then he died. Not only that, they mutilated his body. They took all the precious metals, precious things on his body. That's how they killed him. The issue of the head, I argue that it was not an accident. In the book, I supported that.
What is the issue of the head? My children don't know the issue of the head.
Yes, when the British, there was this focus on the head of the king. Where is it? But what I was trying to show in the book was this was not an accidental, isolated incident. It was in the nature of the British Army that when they were fighting these wars, they happened to kill a senior person. They cut the head as a trophy. This incident is recorded by another writer saying it happened around Grahamstown, which called Demakanda.
Mm-hmm.
This officer took the head, he deboned it by boiling it, and then he kept the skull on his shop until he died. A third incident, again of cutting of the head, is acknowledged by one of the sources I got, he's saying himself in his diary, when we were fighting in Fort Beaufort, I cut the head of the senior man, then I deboned it, and then after that, then I took this head to Scotland with me as a trophy. So my point is, this was not just one incident. It was in their nature to do that.
Like in Congo with the hands.
Yes.
So then is King Hintsa's head in the UK or is...
I think because that argument is saturated at the moment, I deliberately avoided it. Because remember, the purpose of my book was to talk about things that are not known. I wanted to add value. And I didn't want to reiterate issues that were discussed before. I didn't want to go, because the argument is there, people are talking about it, so I avoided it. Because most people wrote about that. So I moved away from it. Because my idea was to identify a gap in our history. So that was not a gap because that has been explored.
Okay.
Yes.
So in the exploration, where's King Hintsa's head? The children want to know.
I think what I can tell the children that don't only look about his head, talk about all the artifacts, all the bones, all the important things that we need to go and search these things in the museums in the UK, in the US. So let's not just focus on the head. We may need to consider having a commission of inquiry or a team of researchers to go and check these relics, these artifacts, these arms, the tooth, the blankets, the sticks. Yes. So it's not just only the head.
Have human artifacts.
Yeah, there's a lot of us that we know that these things are there in these museums. That's why Nigeria is leading that. They are saying these things must come back to Africa.
Yes.
So with us, we should not just be fixed into the head. It's to say all what belongs to us must come back to us.
You know what's another interesting about the Eastern Cape is that there's so many clans. Even now, I mean, we know of like Amahlubi, Namapondo, Mesa, Namapondo, but you mentioned other things, not things, other kingdoms,
yes.
Kingdoms and nations. So what does that mean? How come it's so scattered? And
no, in simplistic terms, at the time of these wars, the leading kingdom there was Nongqawuse.
Okay.
That is why King Hintsa was feared by the colonialist. It was a big kingdom. Remember how Nongqawuse became bigger than other kingdoms? It was their strategy of defeat and integration. So amaXhosa, if they defeat a nation, they integrate. Like for example, Tina singabeSuthu, amamvulane, amavundle, amanqosini, omdumane, amantshilibe, were the nations that came from Lesotho.
Yes.
amaXhosa defeated us and integrated us. They did the same thing to the Khoisan, which is uve kuthethwa amanqarhwane, osukwini, ogiqwa, osithathu. Those are not maXhosa. Those are Khoisan who were defeated and integrated. So amaXhosa were very strategic. That's why they were the center of the attention at that time. Whereas other kingdoms, which is Abathembu, Amampondo, Namampondo Mise, didn't really have a direct, brutal contact with the colonialists. So I think amaXhosa, because they were in this situation where they knew that they were facing this big enemy, they had to stay strong, keep the nation together. Remember, the whole plan was to exterminate them in the same way the Khoisan exterminated. So they were facing an insurmountable task of trying to defend themselves, keep themselves as a nation.
What about Amahlubi? Sorry.
As I said to you, Amahlubi, remember,
Because they were big when they...
During the time of... It's a sad story in the Amahlubi. Sometimes it makes me want to cry. Because Amahlubi, history is saying, they were even bigger than the Zulu nation.
Yes.
But unfortunately, after they cross the river coming towards Lesotho, crossing the Drakensberg Mountains, remember, nations were moving away from Shaka. So they had 2 or 3 vicious fights with the Amangwane, Amatuan. Amahlubi were led by Mpangazit. In the second or third fight, then eventually, unfortunately, King Bangazita is killed. He was the last royal leader of the United Mahlubi. So then Amahlubi then integrated. So what disintegrated? What then Matiwane did, after he defeated them, then he integrated them to himself. That's why when Matiwane led Amangwane to the Eastern Cape, there were thousands of people. So when Abathembu saw this, they were terrified. We're not going to defeat these people. Because Matiwane had Amangwane and Amahlubi under him. Now, Abathembu then requested the assistance of amaXhosa and Amampondo to assist them to defeat Amahlubi and Amangwane. So that war of Mpolompo near Mthatha in 1828 marked the end of Amangwane now as a nation. Hence, then the king again of amaXhosa, which is Hintsa, says that we cannot leave these people scattered. He integrated them to his kingdom. That is why some of them are called Amamfengu. So Hintsa, in the form of integration, then he took his daughter, he gave it to Prince Njokweni of Amazizi to say, let's build a nation. So from that group of Amahlubi, Amangwane, Abambo, then Hintsa integrated them. Then later on, then the War of Hintsa in 1835, then through the influence of Reverend John Aliff, who drove a wedge in the relationship between these people and amaXhosa, then most of them then embarked on that exodus to stay in Nqoshwa since that War of 1835. So Amahlubi come from that. That is why even if you go to Eastern Cape, you'll see them in various parts of the region, coming from that faithful War of 1828.
Oh my goodness. This is so interesting.
Yes.
Then there is also the division between Transkei and Ciskei. What's that about?
I think that one was a colonial construct. Because how do you divide a nation to take, for example, amaXhosa? From King Phalo, he had 2 sons. Remember, an incident happened that when Phalo was a young prince, Abathembu and Amampondo brought their princesses to be married to Phalo. And that created a dilemma for amaXhosa. Who's going to be the senior than the other? If these 2 princes have got sons, who's going to be the king?
Yes.
So then they resolved to say, we're not going to say it's a small house, to say the right-hand house. Because the right hand is there, is strong, supporting the main house. So you don't want to say the small house. And what happened now, from the right-hand house, then Khakhabe was born, who happened to be a warrior. Galeka was born on this other house, who was also a warrior. Then the 2 sons fought. And then after these two sons fought, then that led into the breaking of Amaxhosa into two nations. So there were Amaxhosa, which was, in my book, I call it the first kingdom up to the Kai River. After the Kai River up to Second Port Elizabeth, it's the second kingdom established by Chakhabe. Now it's like a mystical story because from Chakhabe, then he had two sons, Mlao, who became the father of King Nqeka. Nqeka, who gave birth to Maqoma and Sandile, the warriors who fought in these wars.
Whoa!
Yes. So it's a very interesting story. So as I said, that the son who broke away, who crossed the Kai River, with the blessings and support of his father, because Upalo, King Palo, used to visit Chakhabe. Because this was his son. So even when Chakhabe left, he used to say he was given cows, was given people, go and establish a second kingdom. Because you can't be here with your brother. Coming back to now to the east of the homeland, how then do you create two homelands on the Kai River of Amaxhosa, which is Dalega this side, Chakhabe this side, they come from Palo. So you're basically taking a nation of one king established by two sons, you divide it by Kai River. And then you say Transkei and Ciskei. That was an anomaly. Because Amaxhosa are one nation. That is why even at that time, when, remember, King Hintsa comes from Dalega. I want the kids to understand this.
Oh, yes, okay.
Because remember, when the kingdom of Amaxhosa broke into two, it was Dalega this side, Chakhabe this side, which former Ciskei. So in the former Transkei, from Dalega, then there was Kauta, the son of Dalega. Then from Kauta, then there was Hintsa. Right? This side of Chakhabe, it was Chakhabe, then Chakhabe had his son Mlao. Mlao got married to a princess of Abatembo. This was not an arranged marriage. The princess was intentional. He says, I'll get married to Mlao, the son of Chakhabe. Because Mlao was just like a replica of his father. He was a warrior. He had all the accolades. The man was there. So when one day he was going to hunt Mlao, Yese appeared from the mist in the early hours. The historians, they said she was beautiful, exotically beautiful. When she appeared from Lao, they went under the mist. From that union, a child was conceived. His name was King Nqeka. And Lao died a few years after that. Now, Yese, the princess, had a son. Remember, the son was not supposed to be the heir to the kingdom of Amaxhosa. There was already an heir called Timbo. But Yese approached the brother of his late husband, called Ndlambe, who was also a warrior. Said to Ndlambe, I want Nqeka to be the king of Amaxhosa. Ndlambe had to work it out and convince the kingdom that Ntimbo must be removed. Yese's son became the king of Amaxhosa through the influence of the mother. Not only that, when eventually Nqeka became the king, Yese was a co-ruler. Amaxhosa had to go and look for a man. They paid 200 cows of Ilobola to the man to be married to Yese in the kingdom. That has never happened in Amaxhosa before. But through Yese it happened, because she was a woman of influence.
Sure.
So coming back now to the east of former Ciskei and Transkei, then you've got Hintsa. So when Hintsa was, he was killed from Nqeka, remember it was Mlao, then Nqeka, then Nqeka had a son, two sons, 6 sons actually. Nqeka.
Okay.
One of those, the prominent ones was Maqoma and Sandile.
Okay.
When from the other side of the house, they heard that Hintsa is killed, they avenged.
Oh my God.
Showing that this is one house.
Yes.
In other cases, someone would have celebrated to say these are two houses.
Yes.
That one is killed. So now we are take over and then we rule. They didn't do that. They avenged the death of it. To show that Amaxhosa, in as much as they were divided now into 2 kingdoms, but they were always united. You don't touch this one. That is why Sandile, that's how actually Sandile also died. Because in the War of Naichibi in 1877, Sandile was in Kaiskamauk. He learned that Prince Ngapai, the son of Hintsa, was killed in the former Transkei in a place called Gwadan. Sandile crossed the Kai River to go and reinforce to assist. So the issue of the Kai was never a boundary. There was no boundary. Anything that happens to this house affects this house. If anything happens with this house crosses over to support. So in as much as Amaxhosa were divided into two kingdoms, no one would enter between the two of them. You don't go there assuming that these people are divided, so I can do as I like. No. They will remove you and they will deal with you. Yeah, so
I want to. So, what's your book called? And then explain a bit more because you've been covered.
Yes. The title of the book, it Triangle of 100 Years Wars. That's the title. The book basically, why do I call it Triangle of 100 Years Wars? It says that during the colonial era, Amaxhosa fought the British for 100 years in a triangle between Gqeberha, Graaff-Reinet, and Butterworth.
What?
Yes, that is why I call the book Triangle of 100 Years Wars, because it talks to that. Now, ask yourself, Guti, why is this triangle important? Which is between Gqeberha, Graaff-Reinet, and Butterworth. It's because it was only in this triangle where the British were challenged for 100 years. That has never happened anywhere else in the world. Two, it's in this triangle where the British introduced ethnic cleansing, killing or removing people in a geographical space which was between Gqeberha and Graaff-Reinet. That was through the instruction of John Cradock to Colonel Graham Smith to remove these people. So that's what makes this triangle stand out, is the use of the ethnic cleansing. Two, Amaxhosa then retaliated by embarking into endless guerrilla warfare, attacking the British. You say, you're not going to occupy this land. Then the British were compelled to build 48 military forts. I have not seen that anywhere in the world, which is Fort England, Fort Beaufort, Fort Cox, Fort Malan, Fort Jackson, Fort Hare. All those forts were built at that time as a way of trying to resist the relentless onslaught that was launched by Amaxhosa to say, this is our land, you're not going to take it. So they were forced to build 48 military forts and 68 military posts in trying to fortify this land. It's in this triangle where the British then introduced the first biological weapon of cattle mass destruction, which was covered up by Nongqawuse. It's in this triangle. It's in this triangle where the first three wars were led by Prince Chungwa from 1779 to 1803 against the Boers. He defended the land between Gqeberha and Makhanda, Prince Chungwa, over Maqhunukhwebe for 24 years, fighting three major wars. So eventually, when the British then came in 1805, then the Fourth War broke out, which was now led by the British. In the process, Chungwa was killed. So Prince Ndlambe then evacuated 20,000 Amaxhosa. He fought Colonel Graham, and then he managed to actually protect Amaxhosa in the war. Then the subsequent war followed, I think, in 1819, the Battle of Grahamstown. That is why, up to today, is the only battle that has been celebrated over the years, because it's the only war where the British defeated Amaxhosa in the Battle of Grahamstown. You don't hear anything after that. Ask yourself, why don't you talk about the War of Hintsa in 1835, where Smith was defeated by Maqoma? You don't talk about the War of X or the War of Sandile, where Major General John Hare was defeated by King Sandile. History doesn't say anything about that. And history doesn't say anything about the War of Mlanjeni in 1850 to 1853, where 19,000 people died, Africans and Europeans, in a mountain called Ntonsi. The British soldiers called that mountain Mount Misery because they suffered unbearable misery of the highest distinction every 500 soldiers who entered that mountain, only half of them came back alive. When they were fighting on the third year, they were walking on the bones of their combatants. That's what the British soldiers are saying when I read the diaries. They saw the bones. They said they were walking on the bones. As a result, officers lost the morale to fight. Then Maqoma changed the strategy. He says, don't kill them, kill their officers. That is why after the defeat of Smith and Somerset, the British then sent Colonel Fordyce of the 72 Battalion Highlanders. When Fordyce landed in Port Elizabeth, Maqoma sent his spies to look at his height, to look at his uniform. So when Fordyce finally arrived in the battlefield in Mount Misery, he didn't know that he was a marked man. He didn't know that Maqoma has his profile. He didn't know. So when they finally met, I went there last year, I saw that mountain. Maqoma was on this side of the mountain, Fordyce on this side. Then he was shot here by a sniper. Then he died.
What?
Then the war ended. That was the strategy that Maqoma used. And that war, Maqoma had informers. He had his brothers assisting him and other princes around. 3, he had supply lines to send food. 4, he rotated his men. He says, don't put all the men here. He had only 300 men fighting at the time. That's why Maqoma was able to sustain the war. AmaXhosa, hence, at that time, were the only ones who fought the wars. When the British left the Cape, they fought battles, just 1 or 2 day battle. But wars were fought there because they were able to sustain it through military rotation. The next Maqoma never allowed the British to mount their weapons and sit down and be ready to attack. He always used ambushes to dismantle them, to disorganize them, to neutralize them in Mount Misery. So my point is, you don't hear those wars being mentioned. They will either talk about the Battle of Grahamstown or talk about the War of Naichibi. That's when they killed Sandile. It was not a war because conquest was already accomplished through the cat lung sickness in 1856, 1857. So the book then is called Triangle of 100 Years because it talks to those issues. And those wars still up to today regarded as the longest wars. And they are unparalleled wars. Because we haven't seen any other wars fought at that time that comes closer to that. Even in Ethiopia, when the Italians invaded Italy in 1892, and then Italy eventually was defeated in the Battle of Adwa in 1892, which marked the birth of Pan-Africanism. That didn't really take long, that Battle of Adwa. So there is no war in the 1800s fought in the African continent, which comes closer to the wars that AmaXhosa fought in the Cape. No war. You don't hear that anything else in the world. So these were the people who were in the cold face of the brutal colonial encroachment, who faced that brunt of the firepower. And the AmaXhosa, what they did then, which made them also to be victorious in these wars, they were very innovative. They were very adaptable. And these were people who were very good in reading the character of a human being. A Xhosa prince like Ndlambe, why the British missionaries hated him? Because Ndlambe would keep you guessing. You will never really know where you stand with Ndlambe. Look at the son of King Hintsa, Sakhile. Governor Durban goes to the military camp telling Sakhile that your father is dead. But to their shock, there was no emotions in the face of Sakhile. Then the British were like, your father is dead. He said, yeah, I hear you. And so what? So I think it's one of these things that really made them to have an edge over their enemy. Because they were seeing things far. And they had this ability to conceal their vulnerabilities. It was in the nature of AmaXhosa that never show your enemy your inner vulnerabilities. And it was in their nature that don't start a fight from a position of weakness. When Smith arrived in South Africa for the second time in 1847, They met Maqoma in PE. He knocked Maqoma and put his spear, said, I'm going to kill you. Maqoma smiled because it was not yet time to fight. He went and organized the army. 3 years later, then, he showed himself. So the principle of Xhosa, regardless of your anger, never engage your enemy from a position of weakness. Wait for your time. And when the time is right, you must strike like a cobra. It must not be a fight. It must just like a vicious hook over. Then you are done. It was in their nature. So when they were engaged in this war, these wars were planned to say they may come here, take the land, let's plan. And the other thing they did, which was very effective, once the war, for example, if there is a war fought in Pretoria, let me give you an example. You know what Amaxhosa would do? They will never put all their armies in Pretoria. They'll have 1,000 men stationed in Pretoria. What Maqoma would do, if let's say there's going to be war in Gauteng, he will send messengers to say, remember they didn't have dates at that time. He will say, on the 3rd moon, be ready to attack. So you have to count days. So on the 3rd moon, he will have 1,000 men stationed in Pretoria, 500 men in Vanderbiltpark, 500 men in Johannesburg, 500 men in Krugersdorp, all over. Then on that 3rd moon, they will attack simultaneously and create a sense of omnipresent. And that overstretched British soldiers. Because they didn't know where to fight, where to stop. And these fights are happening simultaneously. They will burn the farms, they will confiscate the livestock. And then other thing which was also interesting, Amaxhosa, they never kill women and children, even of the British. That's one thing the British appreciated about the Amaxhosa, that they don't kill women and children. So this sense of creating omnipresent, fighting everywhere, you strike at once, that's what made them to have an upper hand over the British. So when now there's going to be finally a fight of established soldiers, again, they will never face the British artillery in the open area. 2, they always avoided to be there in high concentration in one area. They will always fight their wars in Kaiskamahoek. Why Kaiskamahoek is mountainous? It's got forest. So it's the best place for them to wage their ambushes, the deadly ones. So they will do those ambushes. The other thing they would do, if there's a British army, let's say 4,000 men, concentrated ones, Amaxhosa will attack in the middle, spread them over. Once they are scattered, then they surround 100 men and kill all of them. They go to 50 men, surround them. So they're very clear in terms of how they wage these wars.
It's so interesting. What's interesting for me is that we've always been led to believe that the military strength was from KwaZulu. But now you're giving a completely different narrative.
Yeah, because KwaZulu, it was a battle. Remember, there's a big difference between a battle and a war. The Battle of Isandlwana, they say it was a one-day event. Amaxhosa had to face the British who were resourced. Remember, these people had horses, had organ. Take, for example, the War of 1846. Major General John Hay had 125 wagons, pulled by 16 oxen each wagon. And when they were marching to Kaiskamahoek, they sprayed over 5 kilometers. It was a spectacle. So these people had resources. These wagons had ammunition, had food, had artillery, had guns. The plan was to execute ethnic cleansing for 3 months and lay waste in the entire area of Kaiskamahoek. So when Sandile saw this, he told his generals that how we fight will be determined by their movement. So if they're keeping one line, that works at our advantage. When the first wagon approached Bensil, Mkhubiso village, the last wagon was around Middle Drift. Sandile had 3,000 men on the side, 3,000 men on the other side. Was sitting on a mountain watching them coming. So when the British were working with these wagons, planning to fight this war for 3 months, Sandile was waiting. Historians are saying men were literally vibrating on top of their spears, waiting to attack. When he blew that horn, they jumped. The power and the pace and the precision of the attack, it dismantled the British army in one day. Mostert, in his book, The Frontier, says about that war, he says, I quote, By far, this was the worst humiliating defeat the British had ever suffered on the African continent. Unquote. It's because of the strategy, the technique, the planning. Because if the plan for those weapons was to identify a place, a plateau, then you lock them up into a kraal. Once you do that, you are finished. There's nothing you can do. Because that's their base.
Yes.
If you try to go there, they'll shoot you.
Yes.
So Sandile didn't even allow them to do that. That's why a war that was meant for 3 months, he finished it in 1 day. So the idea of, for example, we hear about Americans using shock and awe in Iraq. Xhosa used that in 1850, shock and awe. Surprise your enemy. Be vicious, be relentless, be quick.
Because the picture is always that we were just this conquered people.
No.
That had no direction,
Hence-
that couldn't
hence-
fight. They had guns and then we all died.
Hence, coming back to my book again, the last chapter talks about history textbooks that we have currently from grade 8 to grade 12. In my book, I say those history textbooks, to me, they represent the tragedy of distorted history. Because if you read them, I analyze them in my book, the history is glossed over, very isolated, compartmentalized, it's disconnected, it doesn't make any sense. So these things were not omitted mistakenly. It was a deliberate plan. And you know where this thing goes into, which is very important. We often think that, that's what my book is saying, conquest was not just taking the land. It was anchored into four phases. It was the dispossession of the land, take the land. 2, displacement from the land, so that we cut your connection of history and culture from your ancestral land. So we must displace you. Thirdly, it was dehumanization. We take their humanity, we take their history, we take their names, we take their beliefs, we take their culture. Then the fourth one was commodification. We reduce them into commodities. These must be the bodies of labor who make wealth for us. And that goes now to my current topic, which says we need now to reclaim the broken African identity. And how do you see this broken African identity today? My point here is to create a link between that process of dispossession, dehumanization, commodification, and the current situation facing the African people. You know what happened? We are still in denial that colonialism still exists in our psyche. We are in denial that our minds are not colonized. And how do you see it? You see it through the following features. 1 is the pull-down syndrome. The pull-down syndrome is not something that we're born with it. It's a colonial mentality. It's a slave mentality. The second one is what I call hyena mob mentality. We always want to do things as a group. We operate in a group. We get comfort in a group. Maxa sikhuluma ngawe sithi Ntsiki besithetha ngawe. It's a group mentality. And that group mentality is destructive in its nature because it wants shortcuts. Does not want to work hard for anything.
Doesn't critically analyze.
Yes, anything it touches, it destroys. And the third aspect of colonial mentality is what we call self-destructive tendencies that we exhibit. You see them, for example, through we are consumers. We were not born like that. We owned the land. We owned the cattle, the cows, as I told you earlier on. But the whole issue of being consumers, be consuming everything, is a colonial mentality because we are born with no resources, not owning anything. The only thing that can satisfy me is wearing this, buying expensive thing. That's the end of it. There's nothing beyond it. It's a consumer mentality. The little man that I have, I buy to make myself feel good. So having studied this history, read it, the question is, how do we go back now to reclaim the broken African identity? Last year, when I was in Guadana commemorating Prince Nxapai, I said there, my talk was, Sikhumbula uNkosi Nxapai. Siphanda ngembali yethu ngenjongo yobuyisa isizwe. We need ukubuyisa isizwe to restore the broken identity, the colonized mind. And we don't want to admit that how we think, how we look at each other, we exhibit these colonial traits. Yes. So my point is, it's not just about the use of land. It's deeper than that. It's the whole system of conquest.
Yeah.
If you think that conquest was just about taking the land, you're missing the point. It was psychological. It was comprehensive. It was about the whole being. That even the way you think, the way I look at you, Uguti, it's so bad that we're now fananam. You cannot be better than me, being like me. It must be someone else. It's a colonial mentality.
Oh, Nkosi yami.
Yes.
Oh, Dr. KLAAS, can you also, before we let you go, can you tell us where we can get the book?
Just Google Triangle of 100 Years Wars. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Yeah. And it's cheaper
fine.
when you get it through PDF as an electronic version.
Okay, so I'll put your email in the...
No, just type the book, then you can order it there.
Oh, it's simple as that?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
16 entities that are selling it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's available. Our history is available.
It's available.
The real one.
Yes.
Thank you so
Triangle of
much.
100 Years Wars, then it's available.
And we don't have time, but I actually had wanted to talk about it. So interesting how uMangaliso Sobukwe is born in Khafrinet.
Yes. Actually, we are aware that there were hearings there, and then where the community made a submission that actually Khafrinet must be named after him.
Yes, I've heard. Those are the
Yeah.
YouTube. I'm so excited
Yes,
about that.
yes.
But it was interesting to link it to your topic because a lot of people from Khafrinet ended up in Robben Island.
Yes.
As part of the PAC.
Exactly.
It's so nice
It
putting
is.
everything together. Thank you so
Exactly.
much, Dr. KLAAS.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure we'll definitely be buying the book. And thank you for taking the time to share your spirit and your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Ms. Mazwai. I appreciate it.
That was divine, guys. So I'm sure the Xhosa Nation is happy and finding themselves in that, you know. Please, guys, people in the North, Basotho, Botswana, we want your history too. The platform is for not even just South Africa, you know, even Ghana, Uganda, Mozambique. Guys, if you are watching from wherever you are, if you're African and you want us to restore our history, this is the platform. Thank you again. See you guys next time, and the details are on screen.
Who are you when all you were has been diluted by lies and white lines cancelling out all that which has been written of your history? Why do you look at yourself as a mystery? Doesn't the sun shine because you open your eyes? Doesn't the moon stay situated within the same stars your DNA sparkles off? Your spirit knows that surely corner into e off. Buza umoya so you may return to being well off. Because spiritually you are rich, yet your ancestors cry because you are out of reach. But yours is to command all elements while God takes inspiration from the very mirror she looked at to become. Remember who you are and never finish just when they think that with you they are done.